Hi, this is Mike Hendrickson from O'Reilly Media. I'm here with Emil Eifrem. How you doing?
I am fabulous. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well, thank you. So we're at Strata in Santa Clara, and you guys have made a few new announcements lately. One is you have a graph database book that you guys are in the process of rolling out. Can you talk a little bit about what this is about?
Sure. So this really is the first, and I think to date, honestly, the best and most comprehensive coverage of this whole emerging landscape of tools that process graphs. And there's been a true Cambrian explosion of tools that process graphs and graph data in the past 24 to 36 months. Some people call them graph databases, some people call them graph compute engines. The one thing they have in common is that they work with connected data. And this 200-ish page book covers that whole emerging landscape.
And right now, I mean, obviously this is not the book, but the book
is correct.
The book is available.
Yeah.
And the book is available now for pre-release download?
It is available as of today on graphdatabases.com in a PDF version. It's raw, it's unedited, but it's complete. And it's going to be on the shelves in 2 to 3 months.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about, would a relational database person find this difficult, or is this going to change their landscape for them?
This book is written with exactly that person in mind, someone who's been working for any amount of years with the normal software stack, right, which definitely includes a relational database. NoSQL hype aside, by far the most dominant database architecture out there is the relational database, right? So they've been working with that and know that inside out, but are interested in this new phenomena, graph databases. So if you have that kind of background, this is a perfect book for you.
Excellent. So can you peel apart a little bit about Neo technologies and Neo4j and all the different components that you guys are...
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're good at many things, I think, at our company. Naming is not one of them. For starters, the name of the company is Neo Technology. But everyone does what you just did, call it Neo Technologies.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And Neo4j is maybe not the most marketable name in the world. But here's the big distinction, right? So Neo Technology is the commercial organization and the founder of the project and the sponsor of the project. So we employ most of the people who contribute to Neo4j, which is two things: an open source project to produce the best graph database in the world, and the product Neo4j, right, which is that graph database.
Okay, so graph databases, are there particular industries that are going to be more interested in graph database technology than others?
That's a great question. So I have a short and a long answer to this. I'll give you the short answer first. No.
Okay.
The long answer.
So it's for everyone.
It is. Okay. The long answer is a little bit more complicated. But what we're seeing right now is that it's very clear that processing connected data is important. If you look at the majority of the empires that were built in the previous decade, at least in the internet space and the software space, they were all based on processing graphs. Facebook is a great example, of course, all about the graph. Social graph, they just launched Facebook Graph Search. There's going to, for 1 billion people, the entire internet, because Facebook is the internet, it's going to have a top bar saying Graph Search. Twitter, it's all about the interest graph. How do people relate to one another and to, in particular, interests? Google actually turns out is a big graph. And if we zoom in a little bit on Google, we see that if you go back 15 years ago, the entire web search vertical was filled with, 45, 50 players trying to do web search, right? You remember the AltaVistas and the X-Sites and the Hotbot and there are all kinds of Inktomi and whatnot, right? And they all did basically the same thing, which is take the entire web, download it into our data center. When someone searches for Mike, let's look through every single document,
instance of Mike,
and look if there's Mike mentioned in that document. If that is, let's serve that back to the user as a search result, right? Then along came a small startup that did exactly that, but on top of that, they also stored how these documents relate to one another. They called that the link graph. And then they devised an algorithm to look at that graph and use that as a ranking mechanism for all the hundreds and thousands and millions and billions of pages mentioning Mike. That little startup, of course, was called Google. And if you go into that exact moment for this industry, that was the moment where the other players had two choices. They could either start to exploit connected data themselves, or they would go out of business. That was an implicit choice. Of course, they didn't know it at the time, right? But all things being equal, if you have two competing products, one use what we call atomic data, so isolated documents. The other one use that plus connected data. The other one will always win. The one who exploits connectedness will always win, all things being equal, right? And so what we believe is that there is a specific tipping point in every industry on the planet where they will be forced to use connected data or not. That happened to web search 15 years ago. It's happening to online job search right now. 2 years ago, not a single job search site used connected data. Today, 10 of the top 10 online job search sites are Neo4j customers. And they all were forced by market pressure. One of them started using connected data, got a competitive advantage. The other ones were forced to also start exploiting connectedness in order to stay competitive. We believe that tipping point is inevitable. It's going to happen in every vertical. It's going to be completely horizontal. It isn't happening in every vertical, no. Okay. It will happen eventually. And the big question is that of timing. We see that very strongly in finance now, in communications. We see it in software, in retail. But there are some verticals where we don't see it yet. But eventually, every single company out there will use a graph database in some capacity.
And so which
that was my long-winded answer.
Yeah, I know, that was the answer that was perfect though, because it is every industry and every person. But so is the vertical of health, are they slowly getting there? Because it seems like the one that could be potentially the most useful.
That's interesting you say that. I definitely put the health vertical, very high on potential, but very low on progress so far in terms of adopting graph databases, or generally speaking, processing connected data. And I'm not a health, IT health professional, so I don't know where that is. I can speculate that they maybe aren't the most early adopters of technology in general, and they have long adoption cycles and things like that. But I agree with you. I think there's a lot of potential in there.
Yeah. So where do you see this all going in the future? I mean, if we looked 5 years from now at graph databases, are they going to be ubiquitous? Everyone's going to be doing it, using it?
I think graph databases today are where Hadoop was 3 years ago.
So just on the beginning of the hype?
It's the beginning of the hype, and there's an explosion of tools. 2 years ago, there was us and maybe 2 or 3 other graph databases. Today, there's 50 graph databases and graph compute engines out there. And some of them are completely independent companies. Some are just open source projects. Some are spun out of Twitter and Facebook and Google. All of these big guys have been forced to build their own graph database. LinkedIn has a graph database internally. Twitter has a graph database internally. Well, Twitter has actually open sourced their graph database. Facebook has a graph database internally, etc. So all of the big guys have been forced to build one themselves. What's new now is that we're now at a point where there are commercially viable, off-the-shelf available graph databases. So the next generation guys don't have to build it themselves.
Scratch, right?
They can just grab it off the shelf, which is exactly what happened to Hadoop 3 years ago. Google had to build it themselves, but then Hadoop about 3 years ago got to the maturity that, depending on your skill set, some would claim that Hadoop today is not even mature enough to consume, but depending on your skill set, you didn't have to start from scratch. You could take an existing Hadoop distro and start building from there.
Excellent. Emil, we look forward to seeing more from you guys in the future. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks.
you.